Welcome back. Last week's power rankings were really very similar to the ones I'd done a couple weeks before. This week's are not. There are some big movers on this week's power rankings. But one thing that has to stay the same is 32nd place. San Jose's trying. The effort is there. And Celebrini, Smith, and all the young players that you want to see develop are doing so. Toffoli's played well for them as well, but San Jose is a team that's unlikely to win 20 games this season, and they're not playing well enough to win. And even though there's some good play there, and I've talked about how results are and everything, when your team's won 15 games all season, I can't justify moving them up. I just can't. So they're 32nd this week. 31st, dropping one spot from last week, Pittsburgh. The Penguins, it's free fall for them. They did get a win over Philadelphia this week, but outside of that, it's been a long season. This is a team that's in a position they haven't been in since, man, I would think Crosby's first or second year was the last time I remember Pittsburgh being this bad, and it was understandable then because they were building up. In this case, they're tearing down, and it will be interesting to see what kind of tactic they use for that because their core is of the older variety, and yet that's a core that's going to want to get another chance at a Stanley Cup somewhere, and that's where the whole question comes in. I can't see them moving any of them, Malkin, Letang, or Crosby. I just can't see it. But at any rate, Pittsburgh's 31 this week. Number 30, moving up one spot from last week, Chicago. They got down 5-1 against Vegas after one. They made a game out of it. And then tonight they go into Anaheim and they beat an Anaheim team that had been playing pretty well. They did affect Anaheim's position on this board as well. So yeah, Chicago, kind of impressed with how they're playing. They're playing loose. They're having fun. It is interesting to see them put up 6 goals tonight, and Bedard didn't have a point. And I realized that in the third period where I was watching it. I was like, wow, they've got 6 goals and Bedard doesn't have a point. That shows that there's more depth in Chicago than I think they've had credit for. Number 29, same spot as last week, Nashville. They did get a win over the Winnipeg Jets, absolutely, and then they looked bad against the New York Islanders. I don't know what it is with Nashville. They have good games against good teams, and then they just don't after that. But for Nashville, obviously in a rebuild, Nyquist gets traded today. I would imagine other names. Started hearing more about O'Reilly, that maybe O'Reilly will be on his way out of town next. But either way, Nashville is in the midst of doing a sell-off at the deadline. They're one of the few sellers right now, so definitely a team to keep an eye on. Number 28, this team will be a seller as well, dropping one spot from last week, is Seattle. They did get the win tonight over Vancouver. Oh, that affected Vancouver's standing. A lot affected Vancouver's standing this week. But Seattle's number 28 this week. I do think with Seattle, with the right moves between now and October, they can be in contention for a playoff spot. The West is not a juggernaut. There are some teams that I looked at in this week's power rankings and I'm like, man, it feels like there's more mediocrity than usual, which does mean that there's more games that mean something. There's more teams playing for something, but yeah, some of these teams you can see the flaws there, and yet we know from past history that come playoff time, you never know what's going to happen. But Seattle's not going to be in the playoffs. Number 27, moving up one spot from last week, Buffalo. They win just enough games to keep you interested, and then they lose the rest of the games to destroy that interest or punish you for suddenly getting interested in their behaviors and their games. The Buffalo Sabres will be an interesting story in the offseason. Something has to change in Buffalo, but they've already fired the coach how many times since the last time they made the playoffs? How many different GMs have they gone through? How many different players have they gone through? And how many players have they traded that have won Stanley Cups elsewhere? Eichel comes to mind. Sam Reinhart comes to mind. I don't know. Where does Tage Thompson go to win a Stanley Cup? Is he the next one? At any rate, Buffalo's 27 this week. Number 26, dropping one spot from last week, Philadelphia. They did get the shootout victory tonight in Winnipeg, and yet for the Philadelphia Flyers, they don't move up this week. Ersson had a rough night the other night against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Fedotov had an excellent night tonight, though, against Winnipeg. And that's the thing. Fedotov shows at times that he can do it. Like, Ersson had that long stretch there where he looked really good, but Philadelphia's losing just enough games to not really be in the hunt for a playoff spot in the East. Number 25, dropping 2 spots from last week, Boston. Boston, the door's still open for them to end up trying to make a run at a playoff spot. I don't see it. I don't see them really being a contender for a playoff spot at this point in time. Even though I know how close they are. I'm well aware of how close they are. I still just don't see it. And I think the best thing for Boston would be to sell at the deadline and do some sort of a retool in the offseason. Something along those lines. I don't know if Don Sweeney's going to do that or not. We shall see. Number 24. So there's your bottom row. We move up to the next row. Number 24 this week, dropping 4 spots from last week. They just got passed. That's Anaheim. The Anaheim Ducks. They're still in this third row, though, which is an accomplishment that they struggled with last season. So back-to-back weeks in this row. But for Anaheim, I mean, that loss tonight against Chicago, that's a tough one. And it feels like they get a game above 500. They can't quite get 2 games above 500. They get a game above 500, and then they lose. They win, then they lose. And it's a matter of them. They're going to run out of runway before we get to the playoff portion of the season. I think they're going to run out of runway. I do think at this time next week we'll talk about how Anaheim did. A sale of like pending UFAs, nothing major I don't think is coming for Anaheim. Number 23, moving up 1 spot from last week, Montreal. The Habs had a good week. They did. They had a good week. They're on a winning streak. They're playing well. I still don't think they're going to end up making the playoffs, but they go on enough winning streaks often enough. It's a shame they had that 2-7-1 stretch in there, because if it wasn't for that 2-7-1 stretch, we might be talking about Montreal being in contention and fighting Detroit for that final playoff spot or Columbus for that final playoff spot. But the 2-7-1 stretch did happen, and so they're 23rd this week on the board. Number 22, dropping 4 spots from last week, Ottawa. They did not get any movement up the board with that win tonight against San Jose. That win against San Jose is just a starting point. We'll see whether or not they have that momentum going forward. They definitely look better, but it was San Jose. And San Jose at points looked like they might pull that game out too. So for Ottawa, their playoff hopes, I think, have been dashed a little bit with that 5-game losing streak. And now they're going to have to go on a bit more of a streak here of the winning variety. We'll see how that all turns out. But yeah, Ottawa I have at 22nd this week. Number 21, same spot as last week, the Rangers. The Rangers, now that they've traded out Lindgren, and I've seen all the, Lindgren isn't good anymore. Lindgren is not going to be counted on to play as many minutes in Colorado as he did with the Rangers. It will be a very different experience. And the Rangers have been an interesting team this season in that they've been very hot and cold, and they're still right there. They're right at that playoff line. They're not that far out, and it does feel like there's an opening if they want to grab that. So maybe the Rangers get that. If they do, they'll jump into the top 16 between now and the end of the season, obviously. At this point, they're close. Number 20, dropping 6 spots from last week, Vancouver. It's remarkable that they win a game in LA this week and they drop 6 spots. Remarkable. But there's a lack of confidence. There's an inability to protect the lead. There's a complete inability to do the fundamentals. It just feels like the Canucks are spinning their wheels, and this is where it feels like a team that's playing to get the coach fired. That's how it feels to me. I've talked about this before. When I see a team and they're just, something's wrong, something's not, and they're just not focused, and it feels like they're playing to get the coach fired, which doesn't mean that they're intentionally playing to get the coach fired. They're not soaking up any of the information the coach is giving them, and it's been a really tough watch this week, even with the win against the Kings. But 1-4 on the road trip, there they are. Number 19 this week, moving up 7 spots from last week, St. Louis. I told you they'd move out of the bottom row. I didn't anticipate the week that they just had, but yeah, they move up 7 spots this week from last week. And I debated about whether or not to move them up further. That win against LA, yeah, LA isn't as good on the road as they are at home this year. They've done an Uno reverse from last season, where they were very good on the road and not great at home. But still, I'm not going to take anything away from the Blues. And of the teams that are in the running for that wild card spot in the West, I kind of think St. Louis might be the best of the bunch. There will be a discussion though of that, so we'll go through it and we'll discuss. But I do think St. Louis might end up being the best of the bunch. Number 18 dropping one spot from last week, meaning I do need to do a video about the West playoff picture and all that. I just need to find another really nice picture of a turtle. Number 18 this week, dropping one spot, is the New York Islanders. So the Islanders did get the win over Nashville, and they're one of those teams too that they're just winning enough games to stay in the hunt. They're winning enough games to stay there and to make you think, well, maybe. And because the Islanders have done it before, made the playoffs when it's not expected, we're not necessarily counting them out. Clearly, they're close because I do have them 18. At least in the way they're playing right now, I feel like they're close. It is a tough task to get there. I think they're still, 6 points back of a playoff spot? It's very unlikely, but it just doesn't feel like anybody's really running away with it. Very hot and cold streaks going on. Number 17 this week, moving up 5 spots from last week, Utah. Utah may very well be that team as well. So the Vancouver Canucks unable to lock things down. If they had, instead of going 1-4 on the road trip, if they'd gone 3-2, I don't think we'd be talking about the Blues and Utah being close and maybe they get in. I think we'd be talking about, well, the Canucks seem to have things well in hand because they'd be, 5 points ahead of Calgary? But they're not. So, yeah, Utah is in a good position right now. They did lose that game against the Devils. But if you look at their upcoming 5 games, their next 5 games on the schedule, those are winnable games. At least I would say they could win 4 out of 5. And if they do that, they may find themselves above the playoff line because Vancouver is not playing like a team that has any interest in making the playoffs. And number 16 this week, actually moving up 3 spots because of some of the ineptitude elsewhere, is Calgary. So they get shut out both games in Florida, which, considering the fact that both Florida and Tampa are in the top row this week, I can't really penalize them too much for that. Tomorrow in Carolina might decide whether or not they stay in that second row. If they win that game in Carolina, absolutely. But Calgary being 16th and the fact they're only 1 point out of the playoffs, it is an example to me of the weakness that we're seeing in the West amongst the teams that are fighting for that final playoff spot, which is why I'm almost at this point rooting for either St. Louis or Utah to get it. Because I don't want to see a team make the playoffs like Washington last year, for instance. They made it and then they just got swept in the first round and it was clear that they weren't at that level. I don't want to see that this year. I don't want to see a team make the playoffs and then just get absolutely obliterated in the first round by the Winnipeg Jets. So, and I know Jets fans wouldn't mind seeing that, but it's a little anticlimactic for me. And so the Flames are 16th this week, but we'll see if they stay there. Number 15, dropping 7 spots from last week, Minnesota. What a difference a week makes. Minnesota is in trouble, and adding Gus Nyquist should help. But this team needs some more talent infusion into their lineup, especially, I want to say up front, but then Brodin left that game last night early too, right? And the thing with Minnesota, they're one of those teams that when they have a lead, I don't think they're going to hold it. That's where Minnesota's at right now. In fact, while I've got these teams on the board, because I don't think I would say that of the teams here, but San Jose, I never trust them with a lead. Chicago, I don't trust them with a lead. Buffalo, I don't trust with a lead. Boston, I'm not that trusting of them with a lead. I'm not saying that there's any data to back this up, just me watching the games. I have no faith in Vancouver when they have a lead. Outside of that, Ottawa's had their struggles. And yeah, Minnesota when they have a lead. I don't really believe they're going to take it home. So, yeah, just throwing that out there. Number 14, dropping 4 spots from last week, Carolina. The Canes are in trouble themselves. They're having trouble with their offense, even though there shouldn't be any problem with their offense. And this is where things are tough. I think with the coaching style of Rod Brind'Amour, that it's that balance, right? Like, are we seeing a team with Brind'Amour that will always be coached to the playoffs, will always be a good regular season team, but can't find the goals in the playoffs? I will be fascinated to see how this year's playoffs turn out. And then if they can't find the goals in the playoffs again when they need them, does Carolina make a big change on the ice? Do they make a change behind the bench? I'm not saying Brind'Amour, but maybe assistant coaches, shuffle something. Because one of the most frustrating things is to have a team that looks like they're close to being a contender, but not quite there. Be very frustrating. Number 13, moving up 2 spots from last week, New Jersey. Jersey definitely helped by the weakness of Minnesota and Carolina this week. So, New Jersey, I still think is going to be a fun team to watch come playoff time. I think it's good they're going to be back in the playoffs. Curious to see when Markstrom comes back, how many games he gets in before the playoffs get rolling. But yeah, I have New Jersey at 13 this week. Number 12, moving up 1 spot from last week, Detroit. They did lose back-to-back against Columbus. But Detroit's been playing well. They played great in that game against Columbus. They kind of got goalied there. And so Detroit just needs to keep with it, not get overly discouraged. They're still above the playoff line. And as long as you're playing well, those results should turn around. So if you play well and you're losing, it's okay. It should start to turn your way. You just don't quite get the bounces. Maybe you're not getting the calls, which is, of course, what Detroit fans are going to be saying tonight. But yeah, I still think Detroit's in good shape. Number 11, moving up 5 spots from last week, Columbus. So Columbus was 10, dropped to 16, and now they're back up to 11. The Columbus Blue Jackets just need to win on the road. If they can play on the road the way that they did, I mean, and I'm giving both teams credit for what was an exciting game between Columbus and Detroit tonight. But Columbus got the 2 points. If they can keep getting those at home or in various outdoor games, who knows? Maybe you have more games at the shoe. You get over 90,000 people to come out and watch. There's no way people up at the top could see anything. There's no way. It's just, and it had to be like flipping cold. So if you were up in like the nosebleeds up there, kudos to you. I don't know that I could do that. But Columbus is number 11 this week. Number 10, moving up 1 spot from last week, the Kings. So the Kings didn't necessarily have a great week, but their week was still, I thought, better than Minnesota's. So they move up a spot because of Minnesota dropping 7 spots. Other than that, if Minnesota had a good week, LA would still be 11th on the board. Minnesota would still be ahead of them. So it's not that LA had a great week. I didn't feel like had a week that meant that they had to drop, right? So yeah, the LA Kings, very good home team, struggle on the road. More of their home games are remaining than road games, so they should be fine. Number 9 this week, dropping 5 spots from last week, Edmonton. The Oilers are definitely a team that has had some recent struggles, and maybe that win tonight against Carolina is a sign they're ready to turn it around. But that East Coast swing is tough. Ask Calgary. It's a tough swing. Ask Vancouver from earlier in the season. It is not easy going through those locations and trying to get a win. So the Oilers, they got the win tonight, and they just have to put this road trip behind them and keep going. I think the Oilers will be fine come playoff time. And yeah, so the Oilers are number 9 this week, just outside the top row. I won't be surprised when they're back in the top row next week. Number 8 this week, moving up 1 spot from last week, Colorado. The Avs are playing well. They got Nichushkin back, which I think is going to help their chances going into the playoffs, provided that everybody else stays healthy. I really do like the Lindgren addition, and I'm going to say it again here. He's going to play less minutes in Colorado than he did in New York. He's not going to be called upon to do as many heroic shot blocks as he did in New York. I think with the right handling and the right minute management, I think he'll be fine. So I like what Colorado's doing. I like what they've done. They fixed their goaltending early in the season. Now they've added a defenseman, and I think they'll make some more tweaks along the way. There's rumors about Middlestad, but at this point, I don't know if Middlestad's going anywhere, and obviously if he goes, they'd have to get a center back, so we'll see what happens there. Number 7, same spot as last week, Vegas. Now, the top rows had movement this week, and I know last week it really didn't, and the week before it really didn't. Vegas stays in the same spot, though. They're an interesting team. I have no idea what to expect from Vegas come playoff time. They had a 5-1 lead on Chicago and barely held on. They got a win, but they barely held on to that one. And they may win the division, but are they going to be a good playoff team? Are they not? And so we'll find out soon. Keep in mind, Shea Theodore is going to be on the shelf for a while. They can put him on LTIR, so before everybody makes the Mark Stone jokes, Stone doesn't have to do anything. You can just have Theodore on LTIR. Number 6, same spot as last week as well, Florida. Not making my case here, am I? Not very well. Florida stays in the same spot. Florida's playing well. I do like the addition of Seth Jones, and I'll explain it here. He does not have to be the guy on the blue line for Florida. He had to be the guy on the blue line for Chicago. They gave him that massive contract, all the hullabaloo around him when they got him. And so he had to be the guy. In Florida, he's what, a number 3-4 defenseman? He could be the number 4. You can argue he's the number 4. So I don't have any concerns when it comes to how Jones is going to play in Florida, because will he play the same amount of minutes? Probably not. Won't be counted on for quite as much. When that pressure comes off, I think some players play better. So don't be surprised when his play gets better in Florida. I like what the Panthers are doing, and I don't think they're done. Number 5 this week, dropping 3 spots from last week, Washington. The Capitals are an interesting case. So the Capitals were getting a lot of wins over the last, I would say, 2 months. Because Thompson was going out there and stealing games. Now, your goaltender's part of the team, yes. So you can't just say, well, the team's not playing well, but the goalie is. So the goalie's saving. The goalie's part of the team. However, this week it feels like Washington just hasn't quite been as sharp. They're not generating a lot. They're being controlled in their own building. And it's something that was starting to happen, but they were relying on those comebacks. Comeback after comeback after comeback. Now they're not able to get those comebacks quite as easily. So Washington, I do think there has to be some amount of concern. Not a lot. And I understand, too, they're miles ahead of second place in the division. That might be part of it. But going with what I've been seeing, they're not the same. It doesn't feel like they're the same team that they were, say, 2 months ago. So they dropped to number 5 this week. Number 4, moving up 8 spots from last week. I'm sure there's Lightning fans who are thinking, has he forgotten us? No. This 8-game heater, Tampa Bay all of a sudden looks like a Stanley Cup contender again. Yep. So, very recently it looked like, well, Tampa Bay's contendership status is probably done. Nope. Vasilevsky's looked like Vasilevsky lately. Kucherov's been playing really well. Hedman's been excellent. Jake Gensel's getting points and goals here and there too. Things are going pretty darn well for this team. And I'm suddenly really liking Tampa's chances. And if you're a Toronto fan, this has to be frustrating because Tampa Bay's playing great. You know that Florida's going to be tough in the playoffs. But at least if you're a Toronto fan, you've moved up 2 spots this week to number 3. See what I did there? The Leafs move up to number 3. I do think they take too much criticism at times. I also think they get overly praised at other times. Reality's probably somewhere in the middle. But Toronto playing well. Stolarz is playing well. I think Matthews, the fact that he's not scoring as many goals as people would expect, I don't think he's playing badly. And Marner's playing very, very well. And he's going to get a raise this summer. But will that be in Toronto or will it be elsewhere? We'll find out in June or July. Unless he gets traded before the deadline, which is not happening. But Toronto right now, they look really good. It's the regular season. People are going to say it's just the regular season, but they've been looking pretty good. Number 2 this week, moving up 1 spot from last week, Dallas. They were rumored to be in on Seth Jones. I'm sure they were. With Heiskanen on the shelf and just injuries being as they are, I'm sure Dallas would love to add another top defenseman. So don't be surprised when any defensemen that are available, the rumors have Dallas as one of the front runners. This time of year, I've always felt like the insiders, the guys who break all the trades and trade rumors, I've always felt like it's a mix of 2 things. They do legitimately have sources, and I've talked to people about this before. Every trade that's talked about doesn't necessarily happen, so I know that very often they'll report on trades that don't happen. But enough of those do end up happening, and I do think that they speculate at the same time. So we all look at depth charts and go, this team could really use a defenseman, this team could really use a forward. I get the feeling. The issue I do have is when those two get mixed. So they'll say, well, I've heard this team and this team. And I think, and so then people may just go, oh, so all these teams are in on it, when some of it's speculation. Anyways, we'll be talking about that again before Friday. Number 1 this week's Winnipeg. Yes, the Jets lost against Nashville. Yes, the Jets lost in a shootout against Philadelphia. They're still playing well. And I feel like the difference between Washington and Winnipeg is I still feel like Winnipeg's playing well. They could have beaten Philadelphia tonight. It was a great night for Fedotov. And against Nashville, UC Saros played arguably the best game he has all season against Winnipeg. So The Winnipeg Jets are going to be fine. They had an 11-game winning streak before their recent 2-game losing streak, where they're 0-1-1. They still got a point in one of them. So I didn't feel like busting Winnipeg down made any sense. I will keep an eye on them this coming week. We shall see how they do this coming week, but I didn't see any reason to bust them down this week. So they have now been number one 9 out of the 20 weeks I've done during the season, which is ridiculous. It is something to be concerned about, to be honest, because it reminds me of 2019 with Tampa. Tampa was almost always number one. They were playing great, and then the first round happened, and I do see some similarities. Also, Boston, that great season Boston had a couple years ago, and then the first round. So we'll see how things go. But right now, Winnipeg looks like a favorite for the President's Trophy. So there's that too. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again